That night, nobody pushed my son out of his chair. Nobody laid a finger on him. But my sister-in-law did something worse. She turned his 10th birthday dinner into a fake luxury photo shoot. She ordered caviar and vintage champagne for her 6 uninvited guests, announcing to her camera that I was paying. I did not argue. I just looked at the manager and said, "Separate checks." By the next morning, that single sentence ignited a massive financial and legal collapse. My name is Madison Cook, and my job is to manufacture perfection. I curate high-end private experiences for a living, which means I know exactly how to orchestrate a room so that every guest feels like royalty. I deal in the currency of flawless logistics, invisible service, and breathtaking aesthetics. For my son Noah's 10th birthday, I applied that same ruthless attention to detail. I wanted him to feel like the most important person in the entire world. We were in the premier VIP dining suite of the glass tidal room, an impossibly chic seafood lounge suspended over the dramatic, rocky coastline of the fictional town of Port Alder, Massachusetts. The evening was supposed to be a masterclass in intimate elegance. I had spent 4 weeks securing this exact room because of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed view of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the dark rocks below. I had arranged a customized children's menu printed on heavy, textured cardstock, featuring gourmet versions of Noah's favorite foods. A delicate custom-designed sea glass-themed cake was waiting in the climate-controlled kitchen wings. I had even set up a designated family photo corner bathed in perfect, soft amber lighting. The guest list was capped strictly at 12 close family members and friends. The schedule was timed to the exact minute. At exactly 7 o'clock, we would serve dinner. At exactly 8 o'clock, the cake would be presented. No surprises, no chaos, just pure, undivided attention on a little boy entering double digits. But chaos, as I was about to learn, wears designer heels and travels with an entourage. At exactly 10 minutes to 8, just as the servers were preparing to dim the pendant lights for the grand cake presentation, the heavy soundproofed oak doors of our private suite swung open without a knock. My sister-in-law, Sloane Mercer, breezed into the room like a minor celebrity arriving at a red carpet premiere. She was absolutely not on the guest list, and she was not alone. Trailing behind her, chattering loudly and ignoring the solemnity of the private dinner, were 5 impeccably dressed lifestyle creators. Rounding out this invasive parade was one professional videographer, a serious-looking man balancing a heavy, glaring camera rig on his right shoulder. Sloane swept toward the center of the room, her oversized silk coat billowing behind her. Her voice projected with a practiced, theatrical warmth that instantly grated on every nerve in my body. "Oh my God, look at the gorgeous birthday boy," she cooed loudly, making sure the camera lens caught her perfect, heavily contoured profile. Auntie Sloane just had to drop by for a few minutes to celebrate our little man. She did not hug him. She did not even lean down to look him in the eye, before Noah could even murmur a polite, "Confused thank you." Sloane pivoted sharply on her stiletto. The warmth vanished from her face, replaced by the calculating glare of a director on set. She waved a manicured hand dismissively at the head waiter. "Actually, guys, could we shift this long dining table slightly to the left? The overhead lighting here is creating terrible, harsh shadows on this side, and my friends need the good angles for our aesthetic tonight. Oh, and clear these coloring menus. They are cluttering the shot." I watched, frozen in a toxic cocktail of professional horror and maternal fury, as my son's carefully curated birthday party was systematically hijacked. Sloane did not yell at anyone. She did not physically push Noah out of his seat. Her violence was entirely visual and atmospheric. With a few sharp commands and strategic, glamorous poses, she pushed the actual birthday boy entirely out of the center frame. The intimate, loving family celebration was instantly reduced to a soft-focus background element for her content shoot. Her influencer friends draped themselves over the expensive velvet banquettes, adjusting their portable ring lights and touching up their gloss, while the videographer circled them like a hungry shark. capturing their fake laughter and staged clinking of crystal water glasses. Then came the audacious, sickening display of fake wealth. Sloane snapped her fingers at a passing server, a gesture I despise in my line of work. We are going to need the Grand Royal Plateau, extra Kumamoto oysters, and let us get an order of the gold-tier Osetra caviar, she announced smoothly, her voice carrying over the quiet conversations of my family. And bring us 2 bottles of the vintage champagne, the reserve stock. You know the ones. She turned her face back to the camera lens, flashing a brilliant, utterly empty smile. My family always goes big for celebrations. We believe in sharing the absolute best, no matter the cost. The implication hung heavy and venomous in the air. My family always goes big. Translation, Madison is paying for all of this, and I am taking the credit for the lavish lifestyle. I stood near the display table where the sea glass cake was supposed to go, my hands clasped tightly together, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of rage against my ribs. I am a professional event curator. I read rooms, motives, and unspoken social dynamics for a living. And reading Sloane in that exact moment was like reading a massive neon billboard. This was not a spontaneous, impulsive drop-in from a loving aunt. This was a highly calculated production. Sloane was staging a luxury hosting event on my dime. She was using my exclusive venue, my meticulously planned ambiance, and my limitless open tab to prove to some invisible internet audience, or perhaps a prospective luxury sponsor, that she possessed top-tier status and elite, high society connections. She was stealing the spotlight, the joy, and the dignity of my son's 10th birthday just to fund her fake, glittering reality. The old Madison, the woman I was before I had a career and a child to protect, might have caused a massive scene. The furious sister-in-law in me wanted to march across the expensive hardwood floor, grab Sloane by her designer lapels, and throw her, her friends, and her blinding ring lights right out into the freezing Massachusetts winter night. But I am a mother first, and a strategist second. I looked over at Noah. He was sitting in his large velvet chair, his small shoulders slightly slumped, watching these loud, oblivious strangers as they swallowed his special night whole. He looked small, and he looked confused. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, forcing my racing heart rate to slow down, forcing my expression into a mask of absolute, unshakable calm. I walked over to Noah, kneeling down on the floor so I was exactly at his eye level, effectively blocking his view of the ridiculous circus performing behind me. "Hey," I said softly, making sure my voice held nothing but pure, unconditional warmth. "Look at me. This is your night, buddy. It is still all about you, and nobody else. We are going to have the best birthday cake in the entire world in just a few minutes. Okay, do not worry about them." He looked into my eyes and offered a small, hesitant smile. "Okay, Mom," satisfied that Noah felt anchored and safe. I stood up. The soft maternal warmth vanished from my posture, replaced instantly by the cold, clinical precision of a corporate executive. I did not look at Sloane. I did not give her the satisfaction of an argument, nor did I provide any dramatic reaction for her rolling cameras. I simply turned on my heel and walked straight out of the private dining suite, stepping out into the dim, ocean-facing hallway, and headed directly toward the front concierge desk. Dario Voss, the general manager of the glass title room, was standing behind the mahogany podium. He knew me exceptionally well. He knew Harrow and Finch Private Experiences, the prestigious firm I represented, and he knew the massive volume of high-net-worth corporate business I consistently brought to his restaurant year after year. He took one look at the icy expression on my face and immediately stood up straighter, sensing the rapid shift in the atmosphere. I stopped right in front of the podium. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I did not need to. I looked Dario dead in the eye and spoke quietly, articulating every single syllable with razor-sharp, unforgiving clarity. "Separate their table. Separate the checks. Put it all on a separate tab. Dario Voss did not flinch. In the world of ultra-luxury hospitality, the best managers operate like highly classified intelligence officers. He knew my firm, Harrow and Finch, Private Experiences. He knew the thousands of dollars in corporate retainers I directed to his establishment every single quarter. More importantly, he recognized the absolute zero-tolerance tone in my voice. There was no need for a messy, emotional explanation about my sister-in-law crashing the party. I did not owe anyone a dramatic shouting match. I deal in logistics, and this was simply a logistical pivot. Dario, I continued, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any familial embarrassment. We are going to execute a hard split. Keep the uninvited party of 7 in the title suite. They are now completely independent of my booking. Do not cut their service, but they are on their own tab starting right now. As for my actual guests, the party of 12, I need a relocation. Is Chef Laurent's private demonstration kitchen available downstairs? Dario tapped a few keys on his polished brass terminal. It is currently prepping for tomorrow's service, Madison, but we can have it flipped and ready for a private seating in exactly 8 minutes. Do it, I said. Move the cake, move the gifts, and move my family. Discreetly. The execution was a masterpiece of invisible service. While Sloane was busy directing her videographer to capture the perfect slow-motion pour of her vintage champagne, the actual waitstaff began a surgical extraction. I walked back into the suite, gently touched my husband's shoulder, and gave him the silent, universal signal for a relocation. Within minutes, my parents, my in-laws, and Noah's close friends were quietly guided out of the room under the guise of a special birthday surprise. Sloane did not even notice us leaving. She was too busy adjusting the lighting ring on a plate of oysters. Descending the spiral glass staircase to the lower level felt like stepping out of a freezing storm and into a warm embrace. Chef Laurent's private kitchen was the heartbeat of the restaurant. It was intimate, lined with gleaming copper pots, and smelled heavenly of roasted garlic and browned butter. The stainless steel prep tables had been hastily but beautifully covered with thick white linen. It was not the expansive ocean view I had originally booked, but it was real. It was warm. Noah's eyes went wide with absolute delight as Chef Laurent himself handed him a custom-embroidered chef's apron. For the next hour, my son forgot entirely about the loud woman who had hijacked his first party. He watched in awe as the pastry team spun sugar glass right in front of him, laughing as flour dusted his nose. We sang the birthday song. He blew out his 10 candles surrounded only by people who actually cared about his happiness. I made a conscious, ironclad decision right there in the glow of the candles. I would not let adult toxicity poison my son's memories. The war upstairs was mine to fight, and I would fight it with cold, corporate precision. While the kids were finishing their custom desserts, I slipped out and made my way back up to the main floor to settle my legitimate bill at the concierge desk. That was when I witnessed the first monumental mistake of Sloane's evening. From the shadows of the mezzanine hallway, I had a clear line of sight into the title suite. Sloane was holding court, gesturing wildly with a champagne flute. Dario, playing his role perfectly, approached her table with a silver tray holding a single sheet of paper. Because of the heavy professional camera equipment her crew had dragged in, Dario presented her with a standard media-hosted dinner form. It was a basic liability and promotional waiver, usually reserved for legitimate sponsored events. I watched Sloane's face. A smart woman trying to pull off a scam would have panicked, realizing she was signing legal paperwork for an event she did not own. But Sloane was blinded by her own ego. She saw the word media, and she eagerly snatched the gold pen from Dario's tray. She wanted to look like the wealthy host in front of her influencer friends. She signed the document with a flourish, proudly scribbling her personal email address right below her signature. She handed it back with a condescending smile. She had just voluntarily provided documented, time-stamped proof that she was claiming ownership of that table and its associated costs. She had no idea she had just locked the handcuffs on her own wrists. Then came the reality check. About 45 minutes later, as the influencer crew started packing up their ring lights and complaining about the parking valet, a server dropped the heavy leather checkbook onto the table. I watched from my vantage point near the hostess stand. Sloane picked it up casually, still playing to the camera that was rolling footage of the messy table. She opened the leather book. I saw the exact second her eyes hit the total. Her posture went rigid. The color drained from her perfectly bronzed cheeks. She had ordered premium caviar, towers of imported seafood, and multiple bottles of reserve champagne. What she had not factored in was the restaurant's strict policy for parties over 6, an automatic 20% large group gratuity, plus the heavy uncorking fees for the vintage bottles she demanded they open just for a video clip. The number staring back at her was not a polite dinner bill. It was a catastrophic financial blow. Yet, the camera was still pointed right at her. She could not scream. She could not throw a fit and demand to see her sister-in-law to force me to pay, because that would destroy the exact wealthy, independent luxury mom persona she had spent the last 2 hours building. She snapped the leather book shut, her smile frozen tight and looking incredibly painful. She leaned across the table toward a blonde influencer in a tweed jacket. Her voice, though strained, carried perfectly out to the hallway where I stood. Honestly, it is totally worth it. Sloane lied smoothly, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the leather binder. After tonight's content goes live, I am going to lock in that massive brand trip to Napa Valley. The sponsors are going to absolutely love this aesthetic. That was it. That was the real motive. She had not crashed a child's birthday out of spite or sheer entitlement. She was using my venue, my credit rating, and my son's party as a fraudulent portfolio piece to secure a highly lucrative sponsored vacation in California. It was not just a family annoyance anymore. It was a calculated business scam. I did not step forward to gloat. I did not intervene as she frantically started tapping on her phone, undoubtedly trying to figure out which credit card would not decline a charge that large. I remained perfectly still, watching her every move like a hawk. Just before I turned to head back downstairs to my family, I saw her do something strange. Sloane picked up the original booking confirmation card that Dario had left on the edge of the table, the one with my name and Harrow and Finch printed clearly at the top. She placed it next to her itemized receipt. Then, looking around quickly to make sure no one was watching, she pulled out her phone and snapped a clear, bright picture of both documents together. She took a screenshot of her own screen as she pulled up the restaurant's digital payment portal. A cold chill settled in the pit of my stomach. That image capture was not for social media. You do not photograph your sister-in-law's corporate booking details alongside a massive dinner bill just to brag. You do it because you are preparing a paper trail. You do it because you are planning to shift the blame. Or worse, shift the debt. She was not just trying to eat for free. She was setting a trap. I turned my back on the title suite and walked away, my mind already 10 steps ahead. The dinner was over, but the real game had just begun. I emerged from the quiet sanctuary of the lower level just in time to witness the climax of Sloane's financial panic. She did not let the waiter run her card cold at the table. She was cunning enough to know that a brutal, public decline would instantly shatter her carefully constructed illusion of limitless wealth. Instead, she had abruptly stood up, clutching her phone to her chest, and paced rapidly toward the heavy glass doors of the restaurant's climate-controlled wine cellar. I stood in the shadows near the coat check, perfectly still, watching her unravel. Her voice was a frantic, hushed hiss, but the pristine acoustics of the tiled hallway betrayed her completely. She was on the phone with her husband, Nate, my brother-in-law. "Move the money right now," she was whispering, her tone a venomous mix of absolute desperation and blinding rage. "Empty the joint savings into my personal checking account. I do not care about the mortgage payment right now. Do it this exact second, or I'm going to look like an absolute fraud in front of these girls." Back at the table, the atmosphere had shifted from artificial celebration to icy discomfort. Her 5 influencer guests and the lone videographer were exchanging uncomfortable, knowing glances. The glittering facade of the ultra-wealthy lifestyle mom had cracked right down the middle. These internet personalities were not stupid. They traded in perception, and they recognized the distinct sour smell of someone who had wildly overplayed their hand. The vintage champagne suddenly tasted flat to them. The gold-tier caviar was just expensive fish eggs. Sloane was not a powerful, connected host generously sponsoring a night out. She was a panicked woman begging her husband to liquidate their modest savings to pay for a dinner she had arrogant plans to steal. When Sloane finally returned to the table, her cheeks were flushed with a mottled, ugly shade of red. She practically threw her heavy platinum card onto the leather folio, refusing to make eye contact with the server. But as the waiter walked away to process the agonizing charge, her eyes swept across the dining room floor and locked directly onto mine. Pure survival instinct kicked in. She needed a scapegoat to salvage her reputation in front of her confused, silently judging guests. She marched straight toward me, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. "I cannot believe you," Sloane announced, her voice pitched perfectly to ensure her table and half the main dining room could hear every single word. "I came here to celebrate our family, and you pull this incredibly petty, vindictive stunt. You deliberately tried to humiliate me on my own nephew's happy day. Who splits a check on family?" It was a masterful, sickening display of manipulation. She was weaponizing the sacred concept of family loyalty to provide cover for an attempted corporate theft. Before I could respond with the cold, undeniable facts of the situation, a soft, anxious hand grabbed my forearm. It was my mother-in-law, Janice. She had come up from the presentation kitchen to gather her winter coat and had walked right into the crossfire. Janice possessed a generational talent for avoiding conflict by forcing the most responsible person in the room to absorb the damage. It was a dynamic I had navigated for over 10 years. "Madison, please," Janice whispered urgently, her eyes darting nervously between Sloane's furious face and my calm one. "Just give the manager your corporate card. Just pay it first to smooth things over and get us out of here. We can calculate the differences and settle it all later. Between family. Please, do not make a big deal out of this tonight. It is Noah's birthday." It was the same tired, toxic refrain I had heard for a decade. Keep the peace. Let Sloane have her way. Subsidize her delusions so the holiday dinners stay quiet. Assume the burden because you are the successful one, and she is the fragile one. Not tonight. I looked at Janice, gently but firmly removing her trembling hand from my arm. I did not raise my voice a single fraction, but my tone was absolute. Unyielding iron. "No, Janice," I said, speaking clearly and deliberately so there could be no misunderstanding. "I am not arguing with anyone. I am not causing a scene. But I am absolutely not assuming the financial burden for 6 uninvited strangers and an unauthorized camera crew. The boundary is set, and the checks remain separate." Janice recoiled, as if I had physically struck her. Sloane let out a theatrical gasp of manufactured outrage, turning back to her friends with an exaggerated look of profound victimhood. But the influencers were already scrolling on their phones, utterly detached and mentally checking out. The illusion was dead, and there was no content left to mine. Sloane snatched her receipt from the returning waiter, her signature slashing across the paper with violent force. She gathered her oversized coat and stormed toward the exit, her entourage trailing behind her in an awkward, silent line. However, as she passed the unattended check-in podium near the heavy front doors, she abruptly stopped. I watched her hand dart out. She did not just grab a complimentary mint. She leaned over the mahogany stand, her phone flashing silently in the dim, atmospheric light. She was taking rapid photographs of the host's digital tablet and a discarded printout of my original confirmation email. She was harvesting data. She was gathering ammunition. I did not run over to stop her. I did not yell. Let her dig her own grave. The ride home along the dark coastal highway was wonderfully quiet. The thick, comfortable silence of my real family filled the warm car. Noah sat in the back seat, carefully holding a leftover piece of his sea glass cake in a small white cardboard box, swinging his legs happily. "Mom," he asked softly, breaking the quiet. Why was Aunt Sloane talking so loudly back there? Was she mad at us? My heart ached at the slight tremor of worry in his small voice. I reached my hand back between the seats, letting him grab my fingers. "No, sweetheart," I answered gently, keeping my tone light and breezy. "Aunt Sloane was just dealing with some confusing paperwork for her job. It had nothing to do with you or your party. You had a great time with the chef down in the kitchen, right?" "Yeah," he smiled, the anxiety instantly melting from his face. "The sugar glass spinning was awesome." I kept my eyes on the dark road ahead. I had successfully insulated his innocent world from the ugly realities of the adult one. But as my husband drove us through our winding, tree-lined neighborhood, I could not shake the image of Sloane's eyes back in the restaurant. The sheer panic when that massive bill arrived. The manic, desperate energy as she secretly photographed my corporate documents. That was not the look of a woman who was simply embarrassed about a declined credit card. That was the look of a woman who was standing on the edge of a massive, terrifying cliff, realizing what she was about to lose. She was not going to let this go. She was going to retaliate to save herself. I went to sleep that night with my phone securely on my nightstand, my mind running through every possible liability protocol. The strike came faster and harder than I ever anticipated. The next morning, the bright winter sun was just starting to filter through our bedroom curtains. The digital clock on my dresser read exactly 12 minutes past 7. My phone vibrated violently against the wood, emitting the sharp, distinct chime reserved exclusively for high-priority corporate alerts. I sat up instantly, pushing the heavy duvet aside, and unlocked the screen. It was an urgent email from the Vice President of Compliance at Harrow and Finch Private Experiences. Attached was a formal, heavily documented grievance file. I read the subject line, the blood turning to absolute ice in my veins. The complaint formally accused me of abusing high-level restaurant relationships for personal financial gain, manipulating venue contracts, and engaging in deliberate payment fraud. The war had officially moved from a petty family dining room dispute to a lethal corporate battlefield. I stared at the screen of my phone, the bright blue light stinging my eyes in the early morning quiet. The email from the compliance division at Harrow and Finch Private Experiences was not a standard inquiry. It was a formal suspension notice. The subject line alone was enough to make my stomach turn over. Pending a full internal review, my vendor contracting privileges and corporate expense accounts were immediately frozen. I opened the attached file, finding a meticulously crafted narrative of professional abuse. There were spliced photographs of the dining room, heavily cropped to make it look like I was standing at the head of the influencer table, hosting them. There was a doctored version of the restaurant's invoice, manipulated to suggest I had walked out on a massive bill and used my corporate leverage to force the venue to absorb the luxury costs. By 9 o'clock that morning, the social fallout began. Sloane had not just gone after my job, she was aggressively working the local social circuit to isolate me. My phone buzzed relentlessly with screenshots forwarded by concerned school parents and local acquaintances. Sloane had posted a sprawling, cryptic story on her social media platform. It is so wild how some event planners live off their VIP clients for so long that they start to think they are the law. Integrity matters, especially when you are pretending to be family. It was a masterclass in plausible deniability. She named no names, but she painted a target so massive and specific that every mutual friend and local parent instantly knew she meant me. This was no longer about a humiliated woman lashing out because her credit card was maxed out. I sat back in my desk chair, the reality of the situation clicking perfectly into place. Sloane was executing a scorched earth campaign. If she could compromise my professional standing and ruin my reputation in our community, she believed she could force me into a corner. She wanted me to panic, She expected me to reach out and beg her to retract the complaint, offering to pay off her restaurant debt and whatever other hidden financial disasters she was running from, just to make the corporate investigation and the neighborhood gossip vanish. She wanted me to surrender and settle the bill for the sake of the family. But Sloane had fundamentally misunderstood the woman she was trying to blackmail. I do not bicker in the comment sections online. I build watertight, disaster-proof itineraries for a living. I opened a new, secure, encrypted folder on my personal computer. I did not text her back or call my mother-in-law to complain. Instead, I methodically saved every single one of her public posts. I logged the exact timestamps for each upload. I extracted the digital metadata from the blurry, cropped photos she had attached to her corporate complaint. Then, I drafted a formal, legally binding data preservation request and sent it directly to the executive management team at the Glass Title Room. Dario Voss responded within 45 minutes. He operated with the exact same cold, surgical efficiency that I did. He sent over a secure, password-protected link containing the absolute, unvarnished truth. There were the digital reservation logs, clearly proving my party was booked for exactly 12 people, not 19. There was the point-of-sale timestamp data, showing exactly when the two tables were separated, which happened well before Sloane even ordered her first glass of vintage champagne. Best of all, there was pristine, high-definition hallway camera footage. The video clearly showed Sloane and her crew arriving completely unannounced, crashing the private suite without a hostess escort. Dario even included a signed, sworn affidavit from his floor staff confirming that the influencer table was an entirely independent entity and that I had explicitly refused to cover their charges. I was reviewing the digital receipts when I spotted the massive anomaly. It was a PDF nestled at the very bottom of Dario's evidence dump, innocuously labeled as a post-event reimbursement request. I clicked it open, and the breath completely left my lungs. The document was digitally timestamped at exactly midnight, just a few hours after we had left the restaurant. It formally requested that the bill she had just paid, be retroactively transferred to the Harrow and Finch corporate account, citing a last-minute client expansion. At the bottom of the form, bold and clear, was my electronic signature. I zoomed in on the ink. It looked incredibly authentic. The loops of the letters and the sharp angles were practically perfect. But a quick check of the IP address embedded in the digital submission details revealed the fatal flaw. The request had not originated from my work computer, nor my phone, nor any network remotely associated with my home address. It was routed through a public wireless network at a coffee shop 3 towns away from where I live. Sloane had not just tried to eat for free. She had actively manufactured fraudulent financial documents to steal from my employer and pin the blame entirely on me. This action completely crossed the line from toxic, entitled family drama into actual, prosecutable financial forgery. I called my husband into my home office. Evan is a good man, trusting to a fault, and deeply, sometimes blindly loyal to his chaotic sister. When I turned the large monitor around to show him the forged signature on the venue document, the color completely drained from his face. He sat down heavily in the leather guest chair, staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. "Madison," he started, his voice thick with sudden, crushing guilt. "About 6 months ago, Sloane came to me crying. She said she desperately needed to learn how to put together a professional brand deck to get her new lifestyle business off the ground. She said she just needed to see how the legal formatting worked to protect herself." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. I sent her a compressed digital folder. It had some of our old household service contracts in it, the landscaping agreement, the previous nanny contract, standard things that had both of our legal signatures clearly printed on them. He buried his face in his hands, the realization crashing down on him. He had unwittingly handed his sister the exact, high-resolution blueprint she needed to forge my identity. I did not yell at Evan. I did not throw anything. He was a victim of her relentless manipulation, just like everyone else in his family. But my patience for familial grace, for turning the other cheek to keep the holiday dinners peaceful, was officially and permanently exhausted. I closed the laptop monitor with a soft, final click. There would be no more keeping the peace. There would be no frantic, tearful calls to my mother-in-law to mediate a truce. When someone tries to destroy your professional livelihood and commits financial fraud using your exact name, you do not call a family meeting. You call a professional. I picked up my mobile phone, completely bypassed my standard corporate legal contacts, and dialed the private, direct number of a high-powered civil litigation attorney who specialized exclusively in corporate financial crimes and identity theft. I was ready to go to war, and I was going to make sure Sloan paid for every single thing she had ordered. The digital footprint left by the forged reimbursement document was merely a loose thread, but when I pulled it, the entire fabric of Sloan's carefully constructed reality unraveled in my hands. Working closely with my newly retained legal counsel, we traced the Internet Protocol address and the domain registration associated with the fake email. It did not lead back to a clumsy, desperate housewife making a one-time mistake. It led directly to a legally registered entity, a freshly minted limited liability company named Mercer House Social Club, listing Sloan as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer. Opening her public-facing website felt like stepping into a masterfully engineered hallucination. It was a digital monument to fake affluence. Sloan had built an entire business model around selling an exclusive, high-society lifestyle to women desperate for social elevation. She offered tiered premium memberships ranging from $500 to $5,000 a year. The site promised paying members unparalleled access to curated luxury networking dinners, elite brand consulting, and private influencer retreats. To validate these absurd claims, the website was heavily populated with high-definition photography. I recognized the backgrounds immediately. She had taken candid, heavily filtered pictures of herself standing in the foyers, restrooms, and peripheral dining areas of at least a dozen different high-end venues across the state. She was systematically passing off these public and semi-private spaces as her own exclusive, fully sponsored event locations. She was not just faking wealth for internet likes, she was actively monetizing a massive, structural lie. The true depths of her audacity became terrifyingly clear when my attorney and I downloaded the digital investor pitch deck hosted on the hidden media page of her site. I scrolled down to page 4, and my blood turned completely to ice. There, under a bold heading titled Strategic Corporate Partners, sat the sleek, unmistakable, trademarked logo of Harrow and Finch, Private Experiences, my employer, the company that had just suspended my credentials. Sloan had illegally ripped the branding from my professional portfolio and plastered it onto her fraudulent investment materials. She was actively soliciting thousands of dollars in capital from unsuspecting victims by falsely claiming she possessed a formalized financial backing from one of the most prestigious luxury event curation firms on the Eastern Seaboard. I suddenly realized that the stolen birthday dinner was never the main event. It was just a desperate, last-minute content grab to fuel a much larger machine. The collateral damage of this machine hit me directly the following afternoon. I was sitting in my car in the afternoon school pickup line, waiting for Noah, when my phone vibrated with a direct message from a woman named Claire. Claire was a fellow mother at the elementary school, a quiet woman who ran a small, struggling boutique downtown. Her message was hesitant, laced with obvious anxiety. She explained that she had recently wired $800 directly to Mercer House Social Club to reserve a VIP seat at an upcoming luxury branding seminar Sloan had been relentlessly promoting online. The event was scheduled to happen in exactly 48 hours. However, when Claire called the hotel venue to ask about parking, the concierge informed her that no such event existed in their system. Now, Sloan was completely ignoring her calls and messages. Claire reached out to me, assuming that since we were family, I might be quietly managing the back-end logistics. A sickening wave of responsibility washed over me. If I remained silent to keep the peace at Thanksgiving, I was no longer just protecting a difficult relative. I was actively shielding a financial predator. Every single day I kept my mouth shut. Another small business owner, another aspiring creator, or another local mother was going to hand over real, hard-earned cash for an absolute illusion. That evening, the illusion shattered the foundation of our own family tree. My in-laws, Robert and Janice, arrived at our front door unannounced. The loud, theatrical arguments and the aggressive blame shifting of the previous nights were completely gone. They were replaced by an atmosphere of suffocating, heavy dread. Robert looked incredibly frail, as if he had aged a decade in a matter of days. He sat heavily on our living room sofa, staring blankly at the hardwood floor. Before his voice finally broke, he confessed that 3 months prior, Sloane had come to him in tears, claiming she was suffering from a temporary cash flow issue. She swore on her life that she was days away from closing a massive, 6-figure corporate sponsorship deal for her new social club. Robert, blinded by a father's desire to support his daughter's grand entrepreneurial dreams, had secretly co-signed a high-interest commercial bridge loan to keep her afloat. He had quietly staked a massive portion of his own retirement security on her glittering, poisonous lies. Janice sat beside him on the sofa, weeping silently into a tissue. Yet, even as she stared down the barrel of severe financial distress, her deeply ingrained, toxic family programming held firm. She looked up at me with pleading, desperate, red-rimmed eyes. She begged me to withdraw the corporate data requests. She pleaded with me not to involve the authorities, asking me to just pay the restaurant debt and help them handle Sloane privately. She sobbed that bringing the harsh light of the legal system into the family would destroy us all permanently. I looked at the two people who had raised my husband, and I felt nothing but a profound, icy detachment. There was no screaming on my part. There were no dramatic, emotional ultimatums. I simply laid down an impenetrable, ironclad boundary. I told them clearly that the era of private family mediation and rug sweeping was permanently over. I instructed them that from this exact second forward, any adult who wished to discuss this situation, the loan, or the fraudulent business with me would be required to do so exclusively through my retained legal counsel. Furthermore, I set an absolute, non-negotiable rule regarding my son. Noah was completely off limits. No one was allowed to breathe a single word of this stress, the money, or the impending legal chaos anywhere near him. If anyone attempted to drag a 10-year-old boy into this adult disaster, they would not see him again until a court judge ordered it. The next morning, my legal team initiated the first official, devastating strike. They drafted an aggressive, comprehensive data preservation demand and a formal legal warning. The documents legally required Sloane to immediately cease and desist all commercial operations using Harrow and Finch branding, to halt all unauthorized use of my name and likeness, and to preserve every single digital communication, bank statement, and promotional asset related to her business. The heavy envelope was delivered directly to her front door by a bonded courier at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I sat at my home office desk, waiting. I fully expected a frantic phone call to my husband. I expected her to run crying to her parents, claiming she was being ruthlessly bullied by her wealthy sister-in-law. Instead, exactly 30 minutes after the courier logged the successful delivery, my mobile phone lit up on the desk. It was a single, direct text message from Sloane. There was no panic. There was no apology. There was only the arrogant delusion of a woman who still believed she controlled the narrative. You do not have the guts to take this public. I did not immediately file a lawsuit. A desperate, loud lawsuit is just noise, and noise gives a manipulative opponent room to construct a defensive narrative. My attorney and I treated Sloane like a hostile corporate entity. We built a silent, invisible cage around her, locking down hard evidence across 4 distinct legal axes. We prepared to strike simultaneously on the grounds of forged signatures, commercial fraud, professional defamation, and the unauthorized commercial use of a minor child's image. Our first strategic move was to lock down the digital trail. I formally authorized my legal team to subpoena the secure payment gateway used by the glass title room. We needed more than just the location of the public wireless network that had sent the fraudulent reimbursement request. We needed the specific device identifier. Within 48 hours, the technology platform confirmed what we already suspected. The request was submitted from a mobile device registered to an alternative email address, one that was heavily tied to the domain registration of Mercer House Social Club. Then, the enemy's defense line broke from the inside. On a Tuesday afternoon, my encrypted email client pinged with a message from an unknown sender. The subject line simply read, "Unpaid invoices and the birthday dinner." The sender was a young woman named Tessa Wynn. She was a micro-influencer, a 22-year-old freelance videographer who had been part of Sloane's uninvited entourage that night. Tessa was quiet, professional, and entirely fed up. Sloane had promised her a flat fee of $800 for shooting and editing the restaurant content, but had completely ghosted her the moment the invoices came due. Tessa did not just send a complaint email. She sent a massive, secure digital locker containing the raw, uncut video files from that night. I sat in my lawyer's towering glass office overlooking the city, watching the footage play out on a large monitor. It was not the polished, heavily edited clips Sloane had posted to her social media. This was the raw feed, capturing the audio before they even stepped foot into the private dining room. The camera was pointed at the floor of the restaurant lobby, but the microphone was crystal clear. "Okay, listen up." Sloane's voice echoed through the high-end speakers, sharp and commanding. "We are going to borrow my sister-in-law's birthday setup for the luxury B-roll footage. She has the premium suite booked. Just act like we belong there. Do not film the kid, just the aesthetic." There was a pause, a shuffle of winter coats, and then a younger voice, presumably Tessa, asked a question. "Are we paying for the table, or is this a sponsored thing?" Sloane laughed. It was a cold, practiced sound. "Oh, my sister-in-law always pays for these VIP tables. She is obsessed with looking like the perfect host. If the manager gives us a hard time about the caviar or the vintage bottles, I will just force the bill onto her company tab. She will not say a word. She never does." The room fell completely silent when the clip ended. My attorney leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. This was the absolute kill shot. This piece of raw audio completely obliterated the narrative of a spontaneous family misunderstanding. It transformed a messy dinner into a premeditated, calculated conspiracy to commit financial fraud before she even crossed the threshold of the restaurant. I did not waste a single second. I took a secure drive containing the raw video, the payment gateway logs, and the forged reimbursement request directly to the compliance division at Harrow and Finch Private Experiences. I walked into the vice president's office, placed the drive on her desk, and played the audio file. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The hostile internal review against me evaporated into thin air. Harrow and Finch did not just drop the disciplinary action. They recognized that their own elite brand reputation was actively being targeted and impersonated by a criminal enterprise. The compliance director immediately authorized the firm's massive corporate legal department to run parallel to my private civil suit, effectively throwing the weight of a multi-million-dollar entity directly behind my defense. With the full backing of my company's resources, our investigation accelerated rapidly. The corporate lawyers ran a sweep of the regional luxury hospitality network, flagging any inquiries that mentioned my name or my firm. Within 3 days, we uncovered 2 additional high-end venues in the neighboring county. Both locations confirmed they had received detailed booking inquiries using my exact email signature template and my forged electronic signature. In both instances, Sloane had attempted to secure thousands of dollars in premium event space without a deposit, only to abruptly cancel the holds and aggressively demand roundabout refunds for catering retainers she had never actually paid. She was testing the fences, She was trying to figure out exactly how far she could stretch my stolen professional identity to generate raw cash. My immediate instinct was to drive over to her house and throw the stack of printed evidence directly into her face, but the chess game required absolute discipline. I decided to let her continue digging her own grave. I ordered my legal team to maintain a total communications blackout. We did not confront her. We did not leak the raw video to the family. We simply worked behind the scenes, systematically locking every single digital and professional door she might try to use. We alerted the regional hospitality boards. We flagged her limited liability company with the State Consumer Protection Agency. We silently dismantled her entire fraudulent playground while she was still swinging on the monkey bars. By the end of the week, the absolute silence was clearly driving her insane. She could feel the walls closing in, even if she could not see them yet. On Friday evening, at exactly 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a direct text message from Sloan. The tone had violently pivoted from her previous arrogant threats. It was a masterclass in feigned vulnerability and emotional manipulation. "Please," the message read. "Things have gotten so out of hand. I know we have our differences, but we are family first. Let us just get coffee and talk privately like family, without all these lawyers and threats. I want to make things right." I stared at the glowing screen, feeling absolutely nothing. I did not type a reply. I did not even leave her on read. Instead, I opened my social media application and navigated to her public business page. Exactly 4 minutes after she sent me that desperate plea for a private family reconciliation, a new story popped up on her feed. It was a looping video of her holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, overlaid with a glittering gold filter. The text across the screen was bold and triumphant, finalizing the details for my exclusive private investor supper this weekend. "Big things are coming. Only surround yourself with people who want to see you win." She was not sorry. She had not stopped. She was simply trying to pacify the guard dog so she could rob the house one last time. I locked my phone, a cold, satisfied smile touching the corners of my mouth. The trap was fully set. The illusion of family solidarity finally fractured on a rainy Tuesday evening. Not with a screaming match, but with a quiet, desperate knock on our back door. I was standing in the kitchen, wiping down the marble counters, when my husband Evan opened the door to reveal his brother-in-law. Nate Mercer stood on our back porch, soaked from the freezing drizzle, looking completely hollowed out. He did not look like the confident man who usually dominated the conversation at family barbecues. He looked like a man who had just realized the parachute he was wearing was actually a backpack full of rocks. Evan ushered him inside, pouring him a glass of dark amber bourbon without a single word. We sat at the edge of the kitchen island, the overhead pendant lights casting long, harsh shadows across Nate's exhausted face, for a long time. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass panes. Then, he reached into the inner pocket of his damp jacket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of papers. He slid them across the granite surface toward me. They were printed bank statements and credit line approvals. He stared down at his hands, his voice barely above a hoarse whisper. Confessing that he had spent the last 3 days tearing through his home office while his wife was out at her fake networking meetings. He had uncovered a commercial line of credit, entirely maxed out, opened under his primary income information. Sloan had manipulated the digital applications, hiding the staggering debt ratio from him. Nate was deeply conflicted, entirely unprepared to formally turn his wife into the authorities. But the sheer terror of absolute bankruptcy had broken his loyalty. He agreed to surrender these documents to my legal counsel, providing the definitive, undeniable proof of the cash flow from that night at the restaurant, along with pages of bizarre, exorbitant expenses categorized as branding dinners and luxury event styling. The financial contagion had officially spread, and when the true depth of the rot hit the rest of the family, the reaction was swift and devastating. My father-in-law, Robert, called us early the following morning in a state of sheer, breathless panic. He had finally taken my advice and hired an independent financial advisor to review the bridge loan he had secretly co-signed for Sloane's fraudulent social club. The advisor uncovered a buried collateral clause that Robert, in his blind, paternal trust, had entirely overlooked. If Sloane defaulted on the massive monthly payments, which she was inevitably about to do, the predatory lender was legally entitled to seize his beloved coastal vacation property to cover the principal. For the absolute first time in his life, the rose-colored glasses shattered. Robert stopped defending his daughter. The abstract concept of her ambition had suddenly mutated into the terrifying reality of losing his own hard-earned retirement assets. Yet, the toxic core of the family dynamic refused to die quietly. That same afternoon, my mother-in-law, Janice, arrived at our house. Despite watching her husband spiral into a stress-induced panic over his jeopardized property, her psychological defense mechanism kicked into overdrive. She cornered me in the hallway, her face tight with misdirected, irrational fury. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest, her voice vibrating with aggressive resentment. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that this entire nightmare was my fault. She insisted that if I had just acted like a supportive family member, if I had just pulled out my corporate card and paid for that single birthday dinner, none of these awful investigations would be happening. She accused me of destroying her family over a petty grudge about an uninvited guest. It was the ultimate, sickening revelation of her worldview. In her mind, the capable, responsible person was always entirely obligated to pay the ransom to keep the chaotic, destructive person happy. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her hysterical energy. I simply looked at her, my voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze boiling water. I told her plainly that this situation did not escalate because I requested separate checks. It escalated because her daughter actively chose to forge legal documents, commit identity theft, and aggressively defraud innocent local women out of thousands of dollars. I reminded her that boundaries are not acts of war, and that I would never, under any circumstances, subsidize a criminal enterprise just to make our family holidays more comfortable. I opened the front door and silently watched her walk back to her car. Knowing our relationship was permanently, irreparably severed, the emotional fallout was heavy. But the legal machinery did not pause for family grief. By Friday morning, my retained attorney officially filed an emergency request in the civil court for a temporary restraining order. The injunction specifically targeted Sloane and her fake limited liability company, legally barring her from using any image, name, or likeness of myself or my minor son in any capacity whatsoever. We expected this move to simply lock down her remaining social media assets, but it inadvertently shook another victim loose from the woodwork. Within hours of the court filing becoming public record, my attorney received a frantic phone call from an independent boutique owner in a neighboring city. This woman had just wired $2,500 to Mercer House Social Club to act as an exclusive vendor for an upcoming luxury showcase. When my lawyer asked her why she felt confident transferring that much capital, the woman broke down in tears. She admitted she had been completely sold after watching a beautifully edited, high-definition video clip on Sloane's business page. The clip featured a stunning private seafood lounge, an elaborate custom cake, and an atmosphere of undeniable wealth. It was the stolen footage from Noah's 10th birthday. The scope of the disaster had officially breached the containment lines of our family. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a restaurant bill. It was a documented, multi-victim commercial scam. The sheer volume of formal complaints, from the micro-influencer Tessa, to the local school mother, to this newly discovered boutique owner, triggered an automatic escalation at the state level. The Commonwealth Consumer Practices Bureau, the aggressive regulatory agency tasked with prosecuting deceptive trade practices, officially opened an active investigative docket. They began issuing formal subpoenas for Sloane's bank records and business communications. The walls were closing in from every single conceivable angle. Her husband was quietly turning over the financial ledgers. Her father was desperately scrambling to save his own property from her reckless debt. The state authorities were actively building a fraud case against her. Any rational human being would have surrendered, hired a defense attorney, and begged for a plea deal. But Sloan Mercer operated in an entirely different reality. Instead of retreating into the shadows, she doubled down with breathtaking, reckless arrogance. She ignored the cease and desist letters. She ignored the state inquiry notices piling up in her mailbox. That Sunday evening, she blasted a mass email to her entire stolen subscriber list, adopting the tone of a persecuted visionary. She claimed that small-minded, jealous individuals were actively trying to sabotage her rapid success. She flatly refused to cancel anything, defiantly declaring that she would silence her haters and prove her elite status once and for all. She announced that her brand-new, ultra-exclusive investor launch party was moving forward exactly as planned, and it was happening next week. The countdown began exactly 7 days before the fake empire was scheduled to burn. Sloan, entirely unbothered by the looming threat of the State Consumer Protection Agency, announced her grand counter-narrative. She booked an expansive glass-walled rooftop lounge on the opposite side of Port Alder for what she aggressively branded as the Mercer House Investor Supper. Her strategy was transparently desperate. She believed that if she could simply host one flawless, highly visible event filled with local business owners, she could overwrite the rising tide of neighborhood gossip and prove that the fraud allegations were nothing more than jealous rumors. I did not send out mass emails warning the local community. I did not post cryptic, passive-aggressive statuses on my social media feeds. I adhered strictly to my core philosophy. The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and you do not need to scream when you hold all the winning cards. I let the legal framework quietly tighten its grip. My first priority, however, was not the lawsuit. It was my son. By midweek, the whispers in our affluent, tight-knit community had reached a fever pitch. Evan and I drove directly to Noah's elementary school and sat down in the principal's office. We did not share the sordid financial details, but we established a rigid, impenetrable firewall. We mandated that absolutely no teacher, faculty member, or guidance counselor was permitted to discuss the birthday drama with Noah. Any parent attempting to fish for gossip through their children would be met with immediate disciplinary pushback. Noah's 10th year was going to remain innocent, completely insulated from his aunt's spectacular, public self-destruction, while we secured Noah's peace of mind. Sloane's public image took a fatal, unrecoverable hit. It did not come from me. It came from Tessa Wynn, the unpaid micro-influencer who had finally decided she was done being professional with a scam artist. On Thursday afternoon, Tessa uploaded a short, unedited video clip directly to her public grid. She did not bother with a long, emotional caption. She simply tagged Sloane's business account and let the raw footage speak for itself. It was a secondary angle from the restaurant lobby, captured just moments before Sloane hijacked the private dining room. The audio was incredibly crisp. The entire town heard Sloane's condescending, calculated voice echoing from their mobile devices. Madison always pays for these VIP tables. She is obsessed with looking like the perfect host. She just needs to be pressured a little bit in front of an audience, and she will hand over the card. It is free money. The clip spread through the local parent groups and neighborhood forums like a terrifying wildfire. Within 3 hours, the polished, aspirational facade of the Mercer House Social Club shattered into a million jagged pieces. The community of wealthy, ambitious mothers who had previously admired Sloane's sudden rise to prominence were violently repulsed. She was no longer a glamorous, self-made branding expert. The video exposed her as a predatory, manipulative relative who intentionally weaponized a child's birthday party to extort her own sister-in-law. The social isolation was immediate and absolute. Several high-profile local vendors publicly withdrew their affiliations from her upcoming supper within hours of the video going viral. Simultaneously, the final, devastating piece of the legal puzzle locked firmly into place. My attorney called me with the confirmed results from the digital payment platform subpoena. The technology company did not just provide a vague location for the device that submitted the forged, post-event corporate billing request. They provided the exact session logs, the fraudulent invoice submission, bearing my forged signature, was uploaded from a smartphone that was concurrently logged into Sloane's secondary, verified business email account. There was zero room for plausible deniability. She could not blame a hacker. She could not claim someone stole her phone. The digital fingerprint directly linked the corporate forgery attempt to the Mercer House executive email server. It was the definitive smoking gun. My lawyer immediately transferred this undeniable proof to the state civil investigators. We spent 48 hours meticulously coordinating with the consumer protection prosecutors, ensuring that our private civil action and their state-level fraud investigation would converge at the exact same moment. We prepared the entire, lethal dossier just in time for her grand rooftop event, despite the mountain of evidence and the total collapse of her social standing. The dying embers of family loyalty flared up one last time. On the eve of the investor supper, Robert and Janice requested an emergency video call. They looked completely broken, their faces pale and exhausted through the digital screen. The reality of the impending legal strike had finally broken through their denial. Janice wept openly, begging me to withdraw the injunctions and call off the state investigators. She pleaded that if Sloane was publicly arrested or bankrupted, the family name would be permanently destroyed. They asked me to just let this one final event happen, hoping it would generate enough capital for Sloane to quietly pay back the defrauded mothers and make the problem disappear. I stared at the screen, my expression completely flat. I told them I was willing to halt the aggressive civil litigation on 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, Sloane had to immediately execute full, documented refunds to every single person she had defrauded. Second, she had to publish a signed, public retraction admitting to the forgery and clearing my professional name entirely. Third, she had to sign a binding, permanent legal decree barring her from operating any business within our county. Janice relayed the terms to Sloane, who was sitting off camera in their living room. I heard Sloane scoff loudly. She leaned into the frame, her face perfectly contoured, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated delusion. She had convinced herself that the borrowed luxury of her upcoming event made her invincible. "I am not signing anything," Sloane sneered, a cold, arrogant smile twisting her lips. "I have highly capitalized investors coming tomorrow night. Real money. You are just trying to scare me because you are jealous of my network. Nobody in their right mind would dare ruin an event with high net worth clients." She disconnected the call, leaving the screen completely black. I set my phone down gently on the kitchen island. She honestly believed that a rented rooftop and a few bottles of sparkling wine provided a magical shield against the consequences of her own actions. She had chosen her stage, and she had chosen her audience. All that was left to do was bring down the curtain. The night of the Mercer House investor supper arrived, draped in an illusion of absolute perfection. Sloane pulled out every single trick she possessed to recreate the exact atmosphere she had violently hijacked at my son's birthday party. She rented a sprawling, glass-walled rooftop lounge in the financial district, paying a premium to have the overhead lights dimmed to a highly specific, warm amber glow. She ordered towering silver trays of imported caviar, buckets of ice chilling dozens of bottles of vintage champagne, and hired a brand new videographer to orbit the room, capturing the manufactured elegance. She wore a stunning, backless designer gown, her hair swept up in an intricate style, projecting an aura of total, untouchable invincibility. She stood at the head of a long, polished mahogany table, radiating confidence because she genuinely believed I was bluffing. In her deeply flawed mind, the presence of my in-laws acting as a human shield meant I would never actually pull the legal trigger and ruin a public event. She thought my threats were just angry words on heavy paper. But I do not make empty threats, and I absolutely do not attend events where I have already planned the demolition. I was nowhere near the rooftop lounge that evening. I did not need to be. The trap was already inside the room. What Sloane did not know, as she smiled brightly for the camera and poured champagne for her prospective backers, was that the room was entirely compromised before the first cork was ever popped. One of the affluent, well-dressed women sitting directly across from Sloane, sipping from a crystal flute and nodding enthusiastically at her business pitch, was Claire. Claire was the mother from Noah's elementary school. The exact same woman who had been defrauded out of $800 for the fake branding seminar just weeks prior. However, Claire was no longer just a frustrated victim. Working in strict coordination with the state consumer protection investigators, Claire had RSVP'd to this new supper under the guise of an interested, high net worth backer. Hidden beneath the collar of her silk blouse was a discreet, high-fidelity audio recording device. She was meticulously documenting every single fraudulent financial claim, every exaggerated return on investment, and every impossible promise Sloane was making in real time. Sloane was performing the role of a lifetime for an audience that was actively, systematically dismantling her. While Sloane was busy clinking glasses and talking expansively about her massive projected quarterly earnings, the legal avalanche finally broke loose on the other side of town. Her husband, Nate, had spent the entire afternoon sitting rigidly in my lawyer's towering glass conference room. After days of agonizing, soul-crushing hesitation, the sheer, suffocating weight of his impending financial ruin finally broke his remaining loyalty. He looked at the mountain of forged loan applications and realized his wife was going to pull him down into a bottomless ocean of debt. With a shaking hand, he signed a sworn, legally binding declaration. The document explicitly stated he had never authorized the use of his personal income data, his social security number, or his signature to secure the commercial lines of credit. He officially and legally disavowed the massive debts his wife had accumulated under their family name. With that single signature, the state prosecutors had everything they needed to move from an inquiry to an execution. At exactly 45 minutes past 8, the heavy polished steel doors of the rooftop lounge elevator slid open. It was not another wealthy investor arriving fashionably late. It was a licensed process server, flanked closely by two plainclothes officers from the State Fraud and Financial Crimes Division. They did not wait politely for a pause in the dinner speeches. They did not care about the rolling cameras or the delicate social atmosphere. They walked with absolute, heavy purpose straight up to the head of the table, right in front of her glittering videographer and her thoroughly confused guests. They handed Sloane a thick, heavily sealed manila folder. They loudly and clearly announced that she was being served. The folder contained the formal civil summons, the devastating state injunctions, and immediate, non-negotiable freeze orders on every single bank account associated with Mercer House Social Club. My mother-in-law, Janice, was sitting just 2 seats away from the point of impact. She had attended the supper out of sheer desperation, praying to any god that would listen that this event would magically legitimize Sloane's business and make the nightmare simply fade away. But as the state officers clearly explained the asset freezes, Sloane did the unthinkable. Instead of showing even a single ounce of humility, fear, or realization, she immediately spun around to the remaining guests. She smoothed down her designer gown and began lying smoothly, effortlessly, claiming this was just a clerical error manufactured by a jealous, bitter competitor who wanted to steal her brilliant business model. Janice watched her daughter smile a completely hollow, psychopathic smile while literally clutching a state subpoena in her manicured hands. The profound sickness of the situation, the absolute lack of a moral center, finally shattered Janice's lifelong delusion. For the first time in her entire life, my mother-in-law did not leap up to defend her daughter. She just sat there in the dim amber light, staring at Sloane, completely paralyzed by the horrifying reality of the monster she had protected for so long. Miles away from the flashing lights, the panicked whispers, and the brutal legal reality of the rooftop, my house was wonderfully, perfectly quiet. I was sitting at the warm granite kitchen island with Noah. We were working through his fourth-grade math homework, specifically multiplying fractions. He was chewing absent-mindedly on the eraser of his yellow pencil, his brow furrowed in concentration, completely oblivious to the fact that his aunt's fake. Glittering empire was currently burning to the ground across the city. The contrast was absolute and deeply grounding. My piece was incredibly real, built on a foundation of truth, hard work, and fierce protection. Her luxury was nothing more than a highly flammable paper house, and I had just handed the state the match. My mobile phone lit up on the kitchen counter at exactly 10 minutes past 9. I recognized the caller's identification immediately. I gently patted Noah on the shoulder and stepped into the quiet hallway to take the call. It was my attorney. His voice was sharp, professional, and immensely satisfied. The service was completely successful. The inside informant had captured pristine, undeniable audio of Sloan promising impossible. Fraudulent returns to the undercover guests. The bank accounts were officially locked down, cutting off her access to every single stolen dollar. My lawyer told me we had reached the absolute point of no return. The investigative file was completely locked and airtight. The choice was now entirely up to Sloan. She could either accept a devastating, ironclad settlement agreement that required total financial restitution, public apologies, and permanent business closures, or she could step into a courtroom. If she chose the courtroom, she would face a highly publicized trial that would inevitably result in severe civil penalties and almost guaranteed criminal charges for wire fraud and identity theft. I truly expected her to finally collapse. I expected the reality of the frozen bank accounts and the presence of state officers to finally break her delusion. But a cornered, desperate narcissist is a profoundly dangerous thing. Less than 1 hour after the officers left the rooftop, my lawyer received a brief, frantic, entirely manic email from Sloan. She rejected every single term of our settlement offer out of hand. Her ego was so completely untethered from reality that she honestly believed she could manipulate a judge and a jury the exact same way she manipulated her internet followers. She demanded a formal mediation hearing. She announced, with staggering arrogance, that she was going to tell her real truth in front of the authorities, and she explicitly demanded that the entire family be present for the final. Brutal resolution. The trap had sprung flawlessly, but the prey was deciding to fight the steel jaws, dragging everyone down into the blood and the dirt with her. The final resolution took place in a windowless, heavily soundproofed conference room at the state courthouse. It was a joint session, a highly unusual combination of civil mediation and a preliminary hearing for commercial fraud charges. Sloan arrived wearing a sharply tailored, conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. She looked like a woman preparing to deliver a tragic, impassioned defense to a sympathetic audience. She still believed she could charm her way out of a paper trail. Sitting across from her was a wall of absolute, unfeeling accountability. My retained legal counsel sat to my left. To my right were 2 stern investigators from the Commonwealth Consumer Practices Bureau. My brother-in-law, Nate, sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, refusing to make eye contact with his wife. My in-laws, Robert and Janice, were permitted to observe from the back row, their faces pale and drawn. Sloan opened the proceeding exactly as I anticipated. She immediately launched into a practiced, tearful monologue, attempting to frame the entire situation as a malicious family vendetta. She claimed I had deliberately humiliated her at a public dinner out of deep-seated jealousy, and that the subsequent business mistakes were simply the desperate actions of a misunderstood, overwhelmed mother trying to survive my cruel financial sabotage. The state lead investigator did not interrupt her. He let her spin her web of lies for exactly 12 minutes. When she finally paused to wipe a dramatic, entirely tearless eye, he simply pressed a button on his laptop. The large monitor mounted on the far wall flared to life. It was not the heavily filtered, aesthetic video Sloan had posted online. It was Tessa Wynn's raw, uncut lobby footage. The audio filled the sterile room, completely inescapable. Everyone present heard Sloane's sharp, calculating voice outlining her premeditated plan to hijack my son's private dining suite and force her massive luxury tab onto my corporate account. Sloane's mouth snapped shut. The color completely drained from her perfectly powdered face. Her tragic victim narrative evaporated into thin air before she even finished her opening statement. But the state was not finished. The investigator laid out the indisputable timeline. He presented the restaurant reservation logs, proving she was never invited. He showed the point of sale timestamp data, confirming exactly when the bills were separated. He submitted the sworn, signed statement from Nate, legally disavowing the massive commercial debts she had accumulated using his stolen income data. Then came the absolute final twist, the definitive blow that locked her in a cage of her own making. My attorney slid a thick-bound dossier across the table. It contained the deep digital forensics of the fraudulent corporate reimbursement request she had sent to Harrow and Finch. The investigators had not just traced the Internet Protocol address to her secondary business email. They had successfully extracted the hidden metadata embedded inside the forged portable document format file itself. The data chain was utterly flawless and completely damning. The forensic report proved that the document was not just a generic template pulled from the Internet. The digital skeleton of the forged invoice was an exact match to a landscaping contract from Evan's old household folder, the exact folder my husband had naively shared with her months prior. Furthermore, the Harrow and Finch corporate logo pasted at the top of the forgery had been digitally lifted from my own professional portfolio site. It was a complete, unbroken chain of intentional, highly calculated identity theft and corporate fraud. The mediator looked at Sloane, his expression devoid of any sympathy. He informed her that if she chose to fight this in open court, the state would officially file felony wire fraud and identity theft charges before the sun went down. Faced with the absolute certainty of prison time, the arrogant, untouchable influencer finally broke. Her shoulders collapsed, the defiant fire in her eyes extinguished, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a woman who had finally run out of exits. She had no choice but to accept every single term of the crushing settlement and penalty agreement. The legal mandates were absolute and unforgiving. She was ordered to immediately liquidate whatever remaining assets she had to completely refund the thousands of dollars she had stolen from the defrauded local mothers and boutique owners. She was forced to pay the outstanding balance to the rooftop lounge venue in full. The state placed her under strict, multi-year financial probation, legally barring her from opening or operating any commercial enterprise or limited liability company. Finally, she was forced to sign an ironclad, permanent restraining order that permanently banned her from ever using my name, my likeness, or my son's image in any public or commercial capacity for the rest of her life. My personal civil suit concluded with equal devastation. Sloane was legally compelled to publish a formal, written retraction on every single one of her remaining social channels, explicitly admitting to the forgery and entirely clearing my professional name. She was ordered to pay a substantial financial compensation package, an amount precisely calculated to cover every single penny of my exorbitant legal fees, plus significant damages for professional defamation. The fallout for my in-laws was equally sobering. Robert and Janice had to face the brutal, undeniable consequences of their lifelong enabling, because Sloane's fake business was completely dissolved and her assets frozen. She defaulted entirely on the massive commercial bridge loan. Robert was forced to undergo a massive, painful personal financial restructuring. He narrowly avoided losing his coastal vacation property, but the aggressive financial penalties effectively destroyed his comfortable retirement cushion. Yet, the financial loss finally forced a psychological breakthrough. For the first time in their lives, Robert and Janice set a hard, impenetrable boundary. They cut Sloane off financially, completely and permanently, finally understanding that enabling a destructive person only destroys the enabler. I did not throw a party to celebrate my legal victory. I did not post a triumphant, Gloating status on the internet. I operate in the real world. And in the real world, you simply clean up the mess and move forward. I closed the massive legal file and locked it in my home office safe. I completely overhauled our family's digital security protocols, encrypting every single personal document. Within a few weeks, armed with the signed, public legal retractions and the state's official findings, I fully restored my unblemished reputation at Harrow and Finch Private Experiences. My corporate credentials were fully reinstated, and I went back to doing what I do best, orchestrating flawless, high-end realities. Exactly 1 year later, the harsh Massachusetts winter gave way to a crisp, beautiful spring evening. It was time for Noah's 11th birthday. There were no sprawling, oceanfront 5IP suites this time. There were no elaborate, multi-tiered sea glass cakes or curated ambient lighting. We hosted a small, incredibly warm gathering in our own backyard. The guest list consisted of exactly 8 of his closest school friends, my husband, and myself. We ordered 5 large pepperoni pizzas from his favorite local shop. We set up a simple projector against the side of the garage and watched his favorite science fiction movies under the stars. There were no cameras filming for an invisible audience. There was no theatrical drama. There was absolutely no one attempting to use my child's joy as a background prop for their own massive, fragile ego. As the boys laughed loudly at the movie, my husband walked over and handed me a small, crumpled paper receipt from the pizza delivery driver. I took it, holding it under the soft, yellow glow of our patio string lights. I looked at the simple, honest total printed on the paper, and a deep, genuine smile spread across my face. I realized then that the most powerful words I had spoken over the last 12 months had nothing to do with lawyers, subpoenas, or corporate compliance. Sometimes, demanding separate checks is not really about the money at all. It is about drawing a permanent, uncrossable line in the sand. It is the absolute, liberating act of separating your own peaceful life from those who are entirely determined to live off your portion. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hype it up so these stories can reach and be heard by even more people.